Genshin Impact is a massive video game, and that goes for its story too. At this point there's almost 6 years of main quests, character quests, and world quests to experience. So you'd think that all the important stuff would probably be hidden in the game itself. But apparently that's not entirely true, because from what I've been told, some pretty major Genshin lore is actually hiding in the manga. Hi. My name is Chris. I'm a relative newcomer to the world of Genshin Impact, and today I'm going to find out if the Genshin Impact manga is really as important as people keep telling me it is. So join me as I dive into each chapter, breaking down the story, characters, and lore implications as we go. Let's get started. The story of the prologue opens up with Vanessa, which is actually a name we've heard before, I think, from our journey with Venti back in Mondstadt. Speaking of Venti, he's here too. In fact, this story takes place a long time after he initially founded the city of Mondstadt, as he reawakens thousands of years later out in the wilderness. During the prologue, Venti slowly realizes that Mondstadt is no longer the same free, carefree, joyful nation that he left behind back in the day. Instead, it has become a city ruled by nobles, who use and abuse the common people, making it the polar opposite of the vision Barbados had for his nation back then. Venti eventually gets in trouble with the nobles because, well, he's Venti. More specifically, he heads to a festival that was once about celebrating freedom and joy for the people, but is now more about the son of the ruler of Mondstadt, Lord Lawrence, getting some anime poon by picking up a commoner of his choosing. This part in particular gave me some tonal whiplash. I mean, just look at this panel. It's heavily implied here that the dude does not have good intentions with the girl he chooses, implying in Genshin Impact. Now that I think about it, we actually did see implications like this before back in Liyue, where we, on our hunt for the perfect perfume, who could forget about that questline, hear about some lusty sailors coming to port every now and then. The manga in particular does not seem to stray away from darker subject matter, and while that does surprise me quite a bit, I actually do enjoy that aspect of it. It makes the world of Genshin feel just a bit more dark, without treading into absolute Game of Thrones dark fantasy territory. Anyway, Venti luckily decides to spoil the fun of this creep by catching a ceremonial ball right in front of him, and by fat-shaming him quite a bit, which understandably sends the young Lord Lawrence into quite a fury. Venti makes his escape from the guards and runs into the brick wall that is Vanessa, who single-handedly helps fend off Lord Lawrence and his men, which is even more impressive due to Vanessa's standing. You see, Vanessa is not just a commoner. She's actually a slave of the Muratan people, which is not a culture we've heard about before. Venti calls them the flame-touched people of Muratan, a proud and hot-tempered people that all seems to be blessed with red hair. Vanessa in particular is known as the Lion's Tooth, as she's never been bested in the fabled arena, where slaves fight for their master's entertainment. And so, she scares off Lord Lawrence while Venti hides like a little bitch. But she doesn't get away that easily, unfortunately, because Lord Lawrence returns, having begged his filthy rich father to buy up Vanessa and her entire clan. And so, he throws her in the dungeon. Venti comes to the rescue while continuing his absolute roast of Lawrence. And here we get a bit more lore about the Muratan people. Apparently, back in Venti's heyday, they lived on the volcanic slopes to the west. They were the children of Murata, the Lady of Fire and the Lady of War, celebrated by her people with rites of combat. But now, Vanessa doesn't even seem to recognize her own lineage or the word Muratan. All she remembers is walking endlessly in a sea of grass for generations, while having little to nothing to eat. As a result, the Muratan clan nowadays only knows combat. Vanessa's tale also introduces a new dragon called Ursa, who starved Vanessa's people for days and is now terrorizing the city of Mondstadt. Yeah, Mondstadt doesn't really jive with dragons, apparently. Anyway, Vanessa and Venti become friends, and now shit starts getting real interesting. As Vanessa recalls hearing about Celestia, the realm of the gods, from her elders, she asks her new friend Venti to spill the deets, and he immediately switches the topic with an ominous look and some dark silhouettes in the background, implying that Celestia is definitely not all it's made up to be. Man, I hope we learn more about it at some point in the manga. Venti tries to convince Vanessa to escape with him, but she refuses, as escaping would probably only make things worse for her and her people. Instead, she aims to win 12 straight battles in the arena, which will apparently win her back her freedom. Here we see Venti's slightly idealistic and naive approach to freedom clash with the reality of Mondstadt's current situation, as Vanessa speaks this banger quote: "Freedom given freely is only a guise for another shackle." I honestly love these two characters together as they provide such a stark contrast to each other. Anyway, Venti gives in and leaves Vanessa alone, smirking as he goes. The day of the final trial arrives. And whoop-de-doo, what do you know? Turns out the dingleberry of a noble had no intention of playing fair. Shocker. Not only has he brought in all of Vanessa's clan to the battle, leaving her to constantly worry about protecting them in the fight, he also has to face her final foe in the form of Ursa the Dragon, who it seems the nobles have made some sort of deal with, offering up Vanessa's clan as a means of sacrifice. The odds are truly stacked against our red-haired heroine here. In fact, Lord Lawrence is so confident in his victory that he promises the keys to the city to Vanessa in case she manages to snag the win. Seeing her people die not only from the dragon but also from Lord Lawrence's soldiers, Vanessa goes full anime rage here in an attempt to save her clan. And that's when it happens. Venti appears, this time dressed in his god regalia, imbuing Vanessa's blade with the power of Animo, and forcing the dragon to retreat with his ancient tongue. After that's done, he of course reminds Lord Lawrence to hand over the keys, and so peace, and more importantly, freedom, is returned to Mondstadt. In the aftermath, there's an interesting mention of the first wars in Venti's inner monologue. Could that be referring to the times when the gods were fighting amongst themselves? If that's the case, that would have to be thousands and thousands of years before the events of the game itself. Anyway, we also get to learn the origins of the Knights of Favonius here, as Vanessa was apparently the one who founded it and became the very first Grandmaster. After her work is done, she ascends to Celestia, becoming the fabled Falcon of the West that we heard about during the Mondstadt Archon quest, who still watches over Mondstadt to this day. Before heading in, we see Vanessa asking Venti whether ascending to Celestia makes you a god or not, which makes him do this sad face, and give a somewhat ominous answer in return. It seems others that have ascended has had their body parts, blood, and organs used by the gods to create features of the world such as clouds, rivers, and seas. He also uses the phrase "in other distant worlds" here, which makes me wonder if he's actually just talking about ancient times long past, or if he really means other worlds. As in other worlds that perhaps the Traveler has been to as well? Speaking of the Traveler, the final shot here shows him and Venti hanging out. But is this the Traveler we know and play as? This could very well be our sibling, or is this from some other time period when the Traveler woke up before speaking to Paimon? So many theories, so little panel. Anyway, that marks the end of the prologue, and I gotta say, I'm impressed so far. We've gotten a lot of lore about Mondstadt and the world of Teyvat already. Hopefully this keeps up in Chapter 1. Took off my headset. Chapter 1 brings us a lot closer to the version of Teyvat we know from the game. After the prologue's ancient history vibe, this chapter drops us back into something much more familiar. Mondstadt's politics, Fatui's schemes, and people smiling politely while clearly plotting something behind each other's backs. So yeah, we're back in Genshin. The Fatui are here, causing problems as always, and we're introduced to a whole suite of familiar faces from the game. Most importantly, of course, Master Diluc. And naturally, my first thought by seeing Diluc here is, do we finally get to learn what happened between him and Kaeya? Because if so, this manga is going in S tier. Anyway, the chapter opens up with this absolute maniac of a man, Il Dottore, running out of bodies to experiment on. So he and his henchmen decide to head to Mondstadt to search for more. Cut to Dawn Winery, where a fancy party is going on and Diluc himself is giving a speech, putting on the polished nobleman act for all his guests, Bruce Wayne style. At this point, I'd say that Diluc is in his Christian Bale era, where he still cares about maintaining public appearances outside of his vigilantism, whereas Game Diluc, on the other hand, feels more like Robert Pattinson Batman, where he doesn't give a shit about keeping up appearances anymore. He is the Dark Knight hero at all times, suit or no suit. Anyway, the party mood is quickly ruined when the Fatui show up. And it's a small thing, but I just want to say here, I really like how the manga handles off-screen speakers. The little mustache cue for this guy is so stupid but effective. I love it. We're properly introduced to Il Dottore this time as one of the 11 Fatui Harbingers, on the same level as Child and La Signora. And apparently he was also the one who defeated Ursa the Dragon a few years earlier, which gives him a pretty nasty bit of leverage on Mondstadt, unfortunately. Dottore wants a meeting with the Seneschal of the Church of Favonius, and then of course Kaeya shows up too. From there, the chapter starts laying out the Fatui's angle. They claim they want to recruit young people from Mondstadt into their ranks, devout children no less. And since Mondstadt is apparently the only nation at this point that's not cooperating with them, Mr. Mustache here frames it like teaming up with them is the only sensible option. Which is obviously complete bullshit. Kaeya immediately smells something's off, and I really like him in this chapter. The snark comes through just perfectly through the page, and the manga does a really great job of capturing that smug way he always talks. Since openly refusing the Fatui could have consequences, the Mondstadt gang decides to stall instead, with Diluc doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. And during the conversation, the Seneschal lets something quite disturbing slip, that the children the Fatui recruit never seem to come back. We also get a really interesting Diluc detail here, because it seems his father's death is somehow tied into all of this, and that Diluc himself left the Knights of Favonius soon after. Spicy. Back at the party, Il Dottore is clearly not happy with how things are going, and his poor henchman is starting to realize that being employed by this guy is maybe not the safest career option available to him. Kaeya shows up and casually directs Mr. Mustache down into the wine cellar as compensation for the inconvenience they caused him. So Mr. Mustache heads downstairs, starts getting handsy with Diluc's wine, and is immediately interrupted by a mysterious masked stranger who stabs his hand with a shuriken-like weapon. Now, I personally don't have a clue who this mysterious masked man with red hair could possibly be. A true mystery. Anyway, the masked GigaChat gets the upper hand rather quickly and starts interrogating Mr. Mustache about Anthony, a baker's son from Mustache who was apparently recruited by the Fatui and never returned. Mr. Mustache is just about to spill the beans when Il Dottore kills him before he can say too much. Dottore also remarks on the vision that the masked stranger is carrying, the same Orphing that we've seen before. Then, just like that, Dottore bails, and with him goes the Fatui's little recruitment proposal. The Seneschal is pleased, though he doesn't really seem to know what just happened. Kaeya, on the other hand, very clearly seems to know what Diluc was up to, which would explain why he sent Mr. Mustache to the cellar in the first place. But Diluc plays dumb, and the chapter leaves their relationship in quite the interesting spot. I'm still not really sure if they're on good terms here or not. It doesn't feel as openly hostile as we saw at the end of Diluc's story quest, but there's definitely some kind of unspoken understanding between them. On his way out, Dottore passes Amber and stares a little too hungrily at her vision. Kind of unsettling. The man does a little evil laugh, and that's the chapter. Compared to the prologue, this one is definitely less about the giant lore revelations and more about setting the stage for what's to come. But I actually think it does that pretty well. It gives us an early look at Dottore, starts teasing Diluc's past, shows off the always interesting Kaeya-Diluc dynamic, and makes the Fatui feel a lot more disturbing than usual. So even if chapter 1 isn't quite as packed with lore as the prologue, it absolutely feels like the groundwork for something bigger. Let's see if they can deliver on this come chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts by giving me exactly what I wanted more of. We get Kaeya's inner thoughts here, and at least on his end, it's made apparent that he still thinks of Diluc as his brother. After all, they're the same type of people in his eyes. Anti-heroes with attitude problems. And just when I finally think that Kaeya is now about to spill the beans, we switch over to Amber's POV. Classic. Well, hey, at least Jean is here too, so I can't stay mad for long. Turns out Kaeya has been given the questionable honor of escorting the remaining Fatui delegates out of Mondstadt. So he and Jean head out on what is essentially an escort quest. While they're heading out though, a bandaged stranger tries to enter the city. The guards refuse to let her in, thinking that she has the plague, which immediately caught my attention because I don't think we've heard of a plague before in Genshin. So what kind of plague is it? Anyway, Mystery Plague Girl is understandably not thrilled about being turned away. So she responds in her own little funny way, by using some weird mystical power to set the Fatui wagon ablaze, and slipping into the city during the chaos. And this is where things kind of get interesting, because Kaeya notes that this does not seem to be vision power. And that kind of threw me a little bit, because up to this point, I'd pretty much assumed that visions were the only way to use supernatural powers like this. Well, apart from weird exceptions like the Traveler, I guess. So immediately introducing this other kind of fire power makes the world suddenly feel a lot less straightforward. The fiery serpent that the girl summons kills 2 Fatui envoys and injures several others, which leaves Kaeya and Amber assigned to investigate. But Kaeya being Kaeya, he would of course rather work alone. Amber tries to tag along, but he shuts that down pretty damn quick. That's got a smart Amber. Kaeya then heads down to Dawn Winery, and this is where we start getting some real interesting lore. We get some more of Kaeya's inner thoughts here, and we learn that growing up in Diluc's family came with huge expectations, all of which Diluc apparently crushed with ease. He became captain of the Knights of Favonius at age 14. Which is already a bit nuts. But then Kaeya just casually drops that after leaving the Knights, he killed his father? Excuse me? This is such a massive reveal to immediately just throw out and then move past. But of course this is Genshin, so let's leave it there for the time being. In case you haven't played Genshin Impact and you're somehow watching this video, typically the way it works in Genshin is that you get one mystery, bombshell drop, and then we just move on right away to something else. Anyway, Kaeya questions Diluc about the recent Fyre attack, and there definitely seems to be a little bit of suspicion there. Not enough to accuse Diluc outright, but enough that it feels like Kaeya is truly probing Diluc to see what he knows. Diluc, meanwhile, is being his usual cold and standoffish self, all while playing darts. But the second Kaeya mentions that the flames at the scene were black, Diluc visibly reacts. What the hell, Diluc? He misses a shot, smashes a vase, and for the first time that I've seen him really, it seems like something has genuinely shaken him here. So whatever these black flames are, they clearly mean something to him. That little moment is probably the most important part of the chapter for me, because it turns this whole thing from some generic flame accident to something deeply personal, it seems. Anyway, Kaeya leaves after getting basically nothing useful out of Diluc, and the chapter actually does a good job of showing how strained their relationship already is here. What's interesting though is that the distance seems to be coming a bit more from Diluc than Kaeya. I know that was the case in his story quest as well, but it feels kinda different here still. After Kaeya leaves, Diluc sits there brooding and thinking. And then we cut back to Amber, who just so happens to run into the bandaged stranger from earlier. Amber interrupts some kind of brooding session from the hooded stranger and appears to immediately regret it. And that's it. That's where the chapter ends. So compared to the first chapter, this one feels less like the political setup and more like the manga turning stuff into a mystery. We're getting drip-fed more and more lore about the Mondstadt cast, but never in a way that fully satisfies your curiosity. As frustrating as that can be sometimes, I hate to admit that it actually works in keeping me invested. Because now I absolutely need to know what happened between Diluc and Kaeya, what the deal is with those black flames, and who the bandage girl really is. So yeah, chapter 2 worked for me. Let's see if we continue to eat good in chapter 3. In chapter 3, we get to learn a bit more about the bandage girl. This chapter slows things down just enough to show that there's a lot more going on with her than just her career as a pyromaniac. Sadly, Amber wasn't really heard in the last chapter. I know, what a shame. The moment the bandage girl notices Amber's vision though, she immediately recoils and tries to leave. Clearly that thing means something to her. But Amber being Amber is not about to let this complete stranger disappear into the night without asking at least 12 follow-up questions. The girl keeps trying to push Amber away, saying that she's one of the unclean ones and that no city will ever open its gates for her. Quite a grim way to describe yourself. We also learn that the bandage girl came to Mondstadt to look for something. Though naturally, this being Genshin and all, we're not about to find out what that is just yet. Amber eventually gets fed up with all the self-loathing evasiveness and calls her out on it in a way that feels extremely Amber. And if I'm being completely honest, it's actually kind of endearing here. Oh god, what's happening to me? Amber is stubborn, blunt, nosy, and way too willing to get involved in other people's problems, but that's also exactly why this scene kind of works. Instead of backing off, Amber offers to help the girl find whatever she's looking for. The two of them head up to the cathedral rooftop, and once again the manga pairs up two very different characters in terms of worldview, and just lets that contrast do the work. I gotta say, I really like that. It makes their conversations feel a lot more meaningful because it's never just about exchanging information, it's about how different people see the same world in entirely different ways. And from up here we learn that the bandage girl's real goal is actually vengeance. But for what? Sweet summer child. But we do finally get a glimpse into her past, and yeah, it's pretty rough. She was cast out of her hometown for being touched by something called the Div. And my guess here is that this was what eventually led her to becoming one of the Torre's subjects, because that would explain both the trauma and the weird fire powers. At some point she loses control of these powers and destroys her own hometown. Kind of a brutal backstory. And this is where the bandage girl actually gets really interesting to me, because the girl talks about all this like she's been cast out by the embrace of the gods, saying that people with visions are chosen, protected, and blessed, while people like her are simply abandoned. I love seeing the relationship between the normal people and the gods being fleshed out like this. It just adds so much to Genshin's world. And this chapter kind of reminds us that if the gods are truly the ones handing out visions, then that also means that some people are just left behind. And as a result, these people might end up deeply resenting the world because of it. Which makes sense. I mean, of course a world built on selective divine favor like this would create bitterness and alienation. After that insightful piece of philosophy, Amber interrupts this by physically grabbing the girl and gliding down towards the city. And for the first time we can actually see the bandaged girl start to soften here, even if only a slight bit. She even asks Amber to burn the clothes she touched, so she won't get infected, which is kinda sad, but also kinda telling for the bandaged girl. She really sees herself as something dangerous, something contaminated. Waiting for them below are Jean and Lisa. And Amber gets what appears to be a light scolding for not actually investigating the Fyre incident as she was supposed to. And with that, the chapter ends. This one is shorter and a bit quieter than the previous chapters, but I actually do think it's doing something really important. It kinda takes the mystery the manga has been building so far and gives it a human face in the shape of the bandaged girl. And asking philosophical questions about the world like this is something I really do like. So I'd say we're headed in a pretty strong direction for this manga. So yeah, that was a shorter chapter, but a very effective one. Hopefully we see more of Lisa in chapter 4. Hello, I am sorry to interrupt your manga viewing experience. I just gotta thank my channel members real quick. They are HopeK96, Richie Reiner, Aiden21408, LSC05, Qya4, Grim23, Roof the RL Panda. Thank you guys so very much for going the extra mile. Also, if you watched this far, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, all that shit. It really helps out. Okay, thank you, bye. Well, looks like Dotorius' poor henchman won't be resting anytime soon. Instead, he's been turned into some kind of mechanically enhanced, mustached monster, ready to go enact his master's revenge. Chapter 4 is interesting for a couple of reasons, even if it's not the most revelation-heavy chapter so far. But we do get some small ones. For one, it turns out this is actually the first proper meeting between Amber, Lisa, and Jean. And honestly, I do kind of like getting that bit of context, because it makes them feel just a little bit more grounded. These relationships didn't just exist fully formed, they had to start somewhere, and here we get to see it in all its slightly awkward glory. And it turns out Jean wasn't really scolding Amber in the last chapter, so much as trying to understand what she had found. So the three of them decide to work together to solve the case, completely unaware that the culprit, or at least someone connected to the whole mess, is standing right there with them. The bandaged girl begs to come along too, hoping that whatever they uncover might give her some clues as to what she's looking for, which, of course, we still do not know what is. But off the group goes towards the library. And before you ask, yes, I did notice that this chamber contains a suspicious amount of full-body Lisa shots. The manga knows what it's doing, I'll give it that. Anyway, one thing I really like here is that Jean and Lisa are very clearly so far ahead of Amber when it comes to the investigation. Amber has the instinct and heart, but Jean and Lisa just feel so much more composed and thorough, and that in turn makes Amber seem a little insecure. Another Amber L. But I do think it works. It gives the group a very nice dynamic right away, because they're clearly not bringing the same things to the table here. Amber is impulsive, Jean is duty-driven, and Lisa feels like the one who always kind of understands more than she's saying. Jean in particular comes through very well in this chapter. She explains that because a Fatui emissary was killed inside the walls of Mondstadt, solving this case is not just about justice, it's a political necessity to secure the relationship between Mondstadt and the Fatui. And that feels very Jean, like we saw this in the game as well. She's not just worried about what happens to the culprit, she's worried about what happens to Mondstadt if they fail. So even though this chapter is a bit quieter than the others, it really does do a nice job of showing just how seriously she takes the responsibility she has. Another interesting thing is Lisa's notes on the Fyre incident. Apparently no one can determine what kind of elemental power was used here, but whatever it is, it's clearly extremely dangerous, because it doesn't just burn randomly, it seems to attach itself to living beings, which is pretty damn horrifying. So the mystery isn't really what or who caused this, because we kinda saw a bandage girl doing that, but more about what kind of mysterious power even is able to do something like this. Amber, naturally, decides that she will run off and try to find the culprit herself. Classic Amber move. Meanwhile, the bandage girl is left to hang out with Jean and Lisa. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, chapter 4 is more of a bridge chapter than a bombshell chapter. but I still think it does a useful job here. It starts building the friendship and group chemistry between the Mondstadt gang, gives Jean some nice characterization, and keeps pushing the mystery forward by making this Black Fyre seem even more mysterious. But at this point I am definitely ready to see the story start to cash in on some of this suspense, so let's see if that happens in Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a lot more action heavy than the chapters before it. And while it doesn't exactly shower us in giant revelations either, it does give Amber a nice chance to carry the story for a while, and prove that she's just slightly more capable than her upbeat energy might suggest. Most of the chapter follows Amber as she searches for Il Dottore, eventually leading her to a hilichurl camp that she has to clear out on her own. Hey, I do that when I play Genshin Impact. Amber apparently didn't think bringing her bow would be necessary, which means she now has to improvise. And to her credit, she actually does a pretty solid job at it. She takes out the hilichurls one by one by using whatever she can get her hands on, whether it be rocks, positioning, or a tactical kick to the face. So even if this chapter is mostly action, I do think it serves a useful purpose, because it shows that Amber isn't just cheerful and impulsive, she's also genuinely resourceful. She knows how to work with the tools that she has, and she knows how to respond quickly when something doesn't go according to plan. Now, I just wish she would do this without internally hyping herself up the entire time and telling herself how great of an outrider she is. God damn it, Amber. Eventually, she spots a Fatui mark in the camp and decides to go investigate it. But before she can get very far, the hilichurls wake back up, and Mr. Mustache shows back up in all his horrifyingly mechanized glory. Jean arrives just in time to save Amber, and that's where the chapter leaves us hanging. Oh, one other thing though, we do also get a very small moment with the bandage girl at the start of the chapter, which shows that she's apparently starting to feel safe enough around Jean and Lisa to actually fall asleep, which might not sound like much, but for someone that appears to be this traumatized and paranoid, it's a nice little detail. So even though most of chapter 5 is focused on Amber fighting through a hilichurl camp, it still quietly keeps that emotional thread hanging in the background. Overall, this chapter though feels less like a big turning point and more like another chapter that builds momentum. It gives Amber some time in the spotlight, keeps the mystery moving just enough, and sets up the coming confrontation with Mr. Mustache without slowing the story down too much. Now, let's see if Mustache Man finally gets what's coming to him in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is where we really start picking up the pace. This is the first chapter in a little while that feels like it's doing a bit of everything at once. We get some solid action, some actual plot progression, and a really important clue tying the whole mystery back into Diluc's past. So yeah, this one's hype. Most of the chapter is spent with Jean and Amber though, trying to take down Mr. Mustache's mechanized form. And surprisingly, Amber ends up doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Once again, the manga gives her another chance to show off how quick-witted and resourceful she is, which I really appreciate. It's not just telling us that Amber is capable, along with herself telling us, I guess. It also keeps finding ways to prove it. As the fight goes on, Jean and Amber notices that Mr. Mustache is very fixated on the Fatui mark. So Amber actually uses that against him, luring him toward a couple of explosive barrels and laying the perfect trap. And on top of that, I think we get one of the first proper elemental reactions that we know from the game, as Amber actually infuses Jean's sword with pyro during the fight, which is a really fun detail. It's one of those little moments that helps the manga feel a bit more connected to the game mechanically, rather than just visually or narratively. And honestly, I've gotta say, the manga is doing so much to strengthen Amber's character so far. I love to see it, but damn, it surprises me. We also get a short flashback here showing what led Jean to chase Amber in the first place. Because back in the library, Lisa and Jean discovers that one of the documents from the burned wagon contains a description of some kind of evil eye. So I guess now the investigation has an actual object, thingamajig, at its center. It seems the Fatui aren't just causing chaos for the sake of it, they're after something specific here. And that's when the really juicy part hits. It turns out that the previous owner of this eye was none other than Diluc's late father, which immediately makes Diluc's reaction earlier to hearing about the black flames make a lot more sense. So whatever happened to his father, it clearly ties into this whole mystery. And that means we'll get that answer in the manga, and I cannot wait to see what it's all about, man. I've been waiting for Diluc backstory for ages now. It elevates the manga so much because it looks like this isn't just some random Fatui operation anymore. It's digging into one of the most important wounds in Diluc's past. Lisa is sent off to investigate Dawn Winery, leaving the bandaged girl alone just long enough to sneak away with the description of the eye in hand. But she is quickly discovered by our very own smug boy Kaeya, and that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, this one worked really well for me. The action is good, the mystery finally moves forward in a meaningful way, and the story actually starts tying its different threads together instead of just piling on new ones. But this chapter also made me realize that I haven't really talked much about the manga's visuals yet, and honestly, I think they're pretty solid. It's not the most stunning art style I've ever seen or anything, but there is more enough details here in the characters and environment and action scenes to give everything personality. Most importantly, I think it feels distinctly Genshin. And for a manga adaptation like this, what more could you really want? But anyway, chapter 6 is a really nice step up, stronger action, stronger forward momentum, and a much clearer sense that this is all building towards something much bigger. Let's see if that continues in chapter 7. This chapter. Boy, this chapter. This is exactly the kind of chapter that made me want to read the manga in the first place, because here we finally get some genuinely crucial background lore about Mondstadt's resident red-haired Giga Chad. And the best part is, it's not just the kind of lore that makes one character more interesting, this is the kind of backstory that changes how you look at Diluc, at Kaeya, at the Knights of Favonius. So yeah, this one really matters. The chapter opens with Lisa putting the squeeze on Diluc. And when Diluc finally agrees to tell her what happened 3 years ago, I was screaming. Finally! But of course, before we get there, the manga makes one quick stop back in the present, because Kaeya is getting increasingly suspicious of our young bandaged friend, and he starts putting some real pressure on her. When it finally looks like things might come to a head, Amber naturally shows up right on time and scolds Kaeya instead. God damn it, Amber. This is where the bandaged girl finally tells us her name, Collei, and quietly slips the stolen notes back to Jean, under the excuse that she was just passing them along. Meanwhile, Kaeya gets caught up in the group's findings and confirms that the strange combustion marks that were at the scene of the crime were the exact same kind that he also saw 3 years ago. And with that, the manga finally takes us to the good stuff. On the day of his 18th birthday, we see Diluc actually genuinely smiling. That is insanely jarring, as we only really know Diluc's smile from when he's putting on a facade. This version of Diluc is still whole. He's not yet become the cold, closed-off version we know him as from the game. After his birthday celebration, he and his father decide to head home together on a carriage. But on the way out, some random hooded guy in the crowd plants some kind of bug-looking thing on the wagon. Maybe some kind of tracking device or a sabotage tool, we don't really know. Then we get this really sweet but death flaggy moment of Diluc's father telling him how much he cares about him. And how proud he is. My dude is just begging for it at this point. He also looks at the weird glove-like device that we saw Diluc wearing earlier and mutters that he won't need it anymore. And then, almost right on cue, everything goes to hell. The wagon gets attacked by hilichurls, the guards are killed, and then Ursa the mother-flipping dragon even shows up. In the middle of the chaos, Diluc's father uses the same glove that his son was wearing earlier in the manga to unleash some of those black flames we've been hearing about, along with some very strong looking chains that bind down the dragon. And for a second, it looks like Diluc and his father might actually make it out. But then the beetle opens up, flashes in the dragon's eye, and somehow sends it in an even greater frenzy. Ursa breaks free and escapes, and after all that, when the fight is finally done, Diluc's father simply collapses, dead. And dude, this sequence hits hard, man. The knights show up, including Kaeya, but it's just too late. And the chapter gives us this really haunting image of what seems to be Diluc's smile disappearing for the last time. And with that, his whole character just starts to click into place for me. The only thing I'm unsure of at this point is Diluc's hatred towards the knights. Like, is their being late to the party enough to make him hate them so badly? But as a whole, the way he carries himself in the game makes a lot of sense now. This isn't just a tragic event in his past, it's the moment where Diluc's whole worldview seems to shatter. And that's why I think this chapter is so important. It adds so much more to his character and his relationship with Kaeya and Mondstadt as a whole. It's brutal, and I was glued to the screen when I was reading this. But Collei doesn't feel like this chapter has done enough yet. She also drops one more reveal, blurting out that Ursa didn't actually kill Diluc's father. Rather, it was his own power that backfired on him, which immediately just raises so many more questions. Was Collei somehow there? I mean, she's very young in the present day, but through the power of anime? Or is this just the insight of someone who has used the Black Flame herself? Either way, it's a hell of a note to end a really good chapter on. And by this point, I am just completely locked in. Bring on chapter 8. Thankfully, we are not done with the Diluc lore drops just yet. Because chapter 8 doesn't just continue his backstory, it finally explains why his hatred for the Knights of Favonius runs so deep. Right at the start, Collei tries to walk back what she said at the end of the last chapter, about Diluc's father being killed by his own power and all, claiming that she just spoke out of turn. Which, of course, Kaeya doesn't believe for a single second. At the same time, we see that Lisa has basically come to the exact same conclusion on her own. So once again, the manga reminds us that Lisa is way smarter than she looks beneath all that. Diluc then explains that his real anger towards the Knights didn't just come from his father's death, it actually mostly came from what happened afterward. And that's where we get into a flashback from Amber's childhood memory. As a kid, she hid in her grandpa's closet and overheard a meeting between some Knights of Favonius and Diluc. And let me tell you, they are not exactly in there having a nice, respectful conversation. Instead, it becomes clear that the Knights intend to fully bury the truth. Diluc's father's role in defeating Ursa the Dragon will be hidden from the public. The real cause of his death will never be revealed. And the Knights themselves will be celebrated as hero who handled the crisis. Dick move, man. And suddenly, Diluc's hatred just fully clicks into place. This isn't just about grief anymore, this is about the fact that the organization he served and was a captain of for 4 years chose politics and self-preservation over truth, over honor and over the sacrifice of his father. They didn't just fail him, they erased what happened. And I think that makes this hit quite hard. We've seen hints before that the Knights aren't always the spotless good guys that they appear to be. In particular, I'm thinking of Diluc's story quest, where even here there's signs of bureaucracy and political maneuvering. But this is definitely the ugliest side we've seen of them so far. So when Diluc swears off the Knights forever here, it definitely feels earned. After that whole thing, the chapter switches back to Collei, who finally starts opening up a bit more. She tells the group about a friend of hers who was injected with something by the Fatui, and also says that the document Kaeya is now holding may lead to a cure. Which is of course the most obvious asking for a friend story imaginable. I mean, even Kaeya and Jean sees through it immediately. I mean, what kind of dingleberry wouldn't even notice that? Oh. Anyway, the group decides to send the ancient document to Sumeru, since not even Lisa can fully decipher the ancient language that's written on it. And from there, the chapter starts finally moving all of its pieces into place. When everyone returns to headquarters, Jean reveals that the Fatui will arrive in 3 days, under the excuse of investigating the Blackfire incident that killed their emissaries. But of course, no one really buys that. At this point, it's pretty obvious that whatever the Fatui are actually planning will probably come to a head when they arrive. On top of that, more of those weird beetle devices have been spotted around town. And to make things a bit more suspicious, the Ludi Harpastum festival is just about to start as well. The festival we saw in the prologue, just to be clear. So now the story has all these ingredients for chaos. A major public event, a city full of hidden weird devices, a traumatized girl seemingly tied to the Fatui, and an incoming diplomatic nightmare. Naturally, the gang now decides to finally team up fully, and split off on their own tasks to catch the culprit before things get out of hand. And that's where chapter 8 leaves us. This was another great chapter. Beyond giving us a more excellent Diluc backstory, this chapter also does an important bit of structural work. It deepens Collei's role in the story a bit more, and it sets the stage for what feels like the manga's first real climax. At this point, it's pretty obvious that something big is coming in chapter 9. Following chapters 7 and 9 is not an easy task. And yeah, this one definitely feels just a bit smaller by comparison. Not because it's bad per se, but after back-to-back Diluc trauma chapters, and all that bigger plot escalation, chapter 9 slows things way down, and focuses almost entirely on Amber and Collei spending time together at the festival. So in terms of raw plot progression, there's really not much going on here. But I do think the chapter still serves an important role, because this is very clearly the calm before the storm chapter. shit's about to go down. Most of it is just Amber and Collei walking around the festival, taking in the sights, and most importantly, bonding. And honestly, it kinda works for me. Collei slowly starts letting down her guard in a way we haven't really seen before. She starts warming up to Amber, going along with her nonsense, and even participating in festival activities with her. All while clearly being baffled by Amber's utter lack of brain activity at times. But that contrast is also what makes this chapter kind of charming. Amber is so relentlessly open, kind, and happy that Collei doesn't really know how to deal with it at times. And that makes for some really compelling character moments. And seeing her react to simple acts of warmth and kindness, like they're completely foreign to her, is kinda heartbreaking. So while this chapter doesn't do much to advance the mystery itself, it does do a lot for Collei as a character. It gives her space to feel less like the mysterious bandage girl, and more like an actual kid who's been through way too much and is only now just starting to trust someone. Outside of that, the only major plot beat we get here is Dottore sending Mr. Mustache off to Mondstadt in his place, because apparently he just can't be bothered with showing up himself. And then the chapter ends on a pretty ominous note, Collei staring nervously at a circus tent, heart pounding and all. But yeah, chapter 9 is definitely not a standout chapter in the manga, but as an emotional setup chapter, I think it does its job pretty well. It makes Collei a bit more sympathetic, strengthens her connection with Amber, and quietly builds a sense of dread right before things supposedly go horrendously wrong. So with that in mind, let's see what kind of disaster that happens in chapter 10. So we start the chapter off with, oh my god. What is that? Yeah, after seeing that, I'd be sweating too, Collei. Anyway, chapter 10 continues doing something that the last chapter already started. It keeps fleshing out Collei as a character. But this time it does so in a much more focused and also a bit more uncomfortable way. Because the manga puts her in what I imagine is the worst possible scenario for a lot of us. Being peer pressured into volunteering for a circus act. In front of everyone. Absolute nightmare scenario, man. From there, she gets whisked away into this little box, while the audience watches her cough and get stabbed a million times as part of the act. Quick side note here, but I just found it funny how the manga uses the Genshin slimes in the actual circus act as well. It's a little touch, but it's one that feels very charming, especially if you played the game a bunch. It makes the whole setting feel even more recognizably Genshin, even while the emotional content of the chapters themselves keep getting just a bit darker every time. Because for Collei, being trapped in that box is no fun at all. It immediately triggers some kind of PTSD from all the abuse she's went through. And the manga doesn't really hold back here. We get some really grim flashbacks, including her being forcibly injected by the Fatui with whatever horrible stuff is now inside her. It's honestly pretty hard to look at. This whole scene just does a really good job of showing off what anxiety can feel like, where a completely harmless situation gets turned into something terrifying when someone's trauma kicks in hard enough. Everything becomes a threat for Collei and everything starts to look like another nightmare, and it gets so overwhelming for her that she grabs a knife that's for some reason inside the box, fully prepared to attack whoever comes for her. She really just does expect the worst out of people. That's what the world has taught her after all, so it's her default. There's also a really sad moment while Collei is in the box, where she starts wondering if this is maybe her rightful place in the world, hidden away, shut off from everyone else where no one else can find her ever again. Yeah, it's pretty rough. We see Amber slowly making her way towards the box, and when it finally happens, Collei's survival instincts just fully take over. And she stabs Amber right in the stomach. Thankfully though, the knife turns out to be a fake. This is a circus after all. Amber doesn't even seem to realize what just happened, which is a bit funny but also a bit sad in a way, because Collei just had this whole massive panic attack and the world and the people around her just keeps moving on like nothing happened. When she's finally calmed down a bit, Collei starts wondering what her life might have looked like if she'd just grown up in Mondstadt instead. Seeing everyone around her so carefree and happy really stirs up a lot in her. And I think that's what makes this chapter work so well. It really is an effective way of showing off Collei's character. And as Amber and Collei keep walking around the festival having fun together again, we see Kaeya watching from a distance. And then suddenly Amber is gone. Kaeya tells Collei that Amber went off to search for more Fatui devices and offers to take her to the rendezvous point instead. Collei hesitantly agrees, but as the two of them walk off together you kinda get this bad feeling. And so does Collei, and that's where the chapter ends. I really like this one, I gotta admit. Plot-wise, it's not the most important chapter at all, but emotionally I think it does a ton of work. The constant unease that Collei feels practically bleeds off the page the whole time. As a result, you spend the entire chapter feeling like something is bound to go wrong. That is exactly how Collei sees the world too, and that's what makes it so effective in my eyes. We are made to experience just a little bit of that tension that she feels through this chapter, and I think that's some impressive handiwork from the storytellers here. And by the end of the chapter, I definitely felt a lot more for Collei as a character than I did before. Now the only question is, what does Kaeya exactly have planned for her in chapter 11? Chapter 11 is where things finally blow up. Not just in terms of action, but also in terms of the tension that has been building between Kaeya and Collei the whole time. Because here, Kaeya's sneaky little plan to expose the culprit comes into full daylight. And yeah, his suspicion of Collei is very much front and center. He's not just side-eyeing her anymore or giving a knowing smile. He is fully prepared to force the truth out of her. And if he has to, kill her. So yeah, Kaeya goes kinda hard here. He relentlessly attacks Collei with his cryo powers, clearly trying to provoke some kind of reaction from her, and draw out whatever hidden power she keeps buried. And unfortunately for Collei, it actually works. Because before long, a strange serpent-like black flame power starts oozing out of her, and we finally get a clearer look at how this whole thing works. Because it turns out that Collei isn't really in control of it after all. Instead, there's this creepy voice constantly talking to her, trying to tempt her to give up control completely. Kinda unsettling, man. The snake also mentions that the power comes from someone named Barnabas, or Barnabas. Which is a name we definitely haven't heard before. So naturally, the manga just drops this on us and keeps on going without elaborating. Classic. There's something very sad about seeing Kaeya and Collei fight like this, because this all happens when Collei was finally beginning to trust people just a little bit. She only just started to believe that not everyone around her might want to hurt her or trick her in some way. And then Kaeya, someone she's been stuck around, just turns around and basically confirms her worst fears. From her perspective, this must feel like just another betrayal in a long line, which is just really sad. Meanwhile, Amber starts realizing that something is wrong and heads towards the giant blue light show in the sky. As Kaeya and Collei's fight continues, we see Collei drifting through this sea of consciousness almost, trying desperately to resist the Serpent's influence. But it's not going too well. The whole thing feels really tragic because Collei is not unleashing this power out of malice. She's losing herself to something that was forced into her in the first place. And eventually she does manage to get Kaeya in a chokehold, and it looks like she's just seconds away from killing him. But then, in one last desperate act of control, she actually manages to stop herself and let him go. Some part of her is still fighting, it seems. Kaeya, however, wastes absolutely no time. The second he gets an opening, he moves in to try and kill her. And this is a very interesting and revealing moment for Kaeya's character as well. Because he can be funny, he can be charming, but underneath all that, he is also very willing to make brutal decisions if he thinks it's necessary. Even killing a child is supposedly not off the table when it comes to protecting Mondstadt. Stay classy, Kaeya. As he approaches for the kill, the chapter takes one more twist, because Collei doesn't even try and resist. She actually begs him to kill her. And that's enough to make him hesitate for just a fraction of a second. Just long enough for Amber to arrive and throw out Baron Bunny, her elemental skill, diverting the attack and saving Collei. After that, the two of them disappear, leaving Kaeya standing there brooding and thinking about what just happened. And honestly, I think I sense just a tiny bit of regret in there. And that's the chapter. This was another really good one. Not only do we finally get a few answers about Collei's powers and how they work, but we also get to see Kaeya in a little bit of a harsher light than usual. This chapter definitely strips away a lot of his charm, and really emphasizes the colder, more calculating side beneath it all. So overall, chapter 11 feels like a major turning point. And with only 2 chapters left at this point, I'm really curious to see what will happen in chapter 12. After the absolute chaos of the last chapter, chapter 12 switches gears just a bit. And more than anything, it gives Amber another chance to show that beneath all the bubbly energy and occasional lack of brain activity, she's actually a lot more emotionally intelligent than people give her credit for. Right after escaping from Kaeya, Collei immediately withdraws into herself and starts putting on this bad guy front. She claims she fooled the whole Mondstadt gang this entire time, says she'll kill again, and just generally tries to make herself out to be the worst possible person. But Amber sees through that act almost immediately, and I really like that. Instead of panicking or lashing out, Amber just calmly brings up all the happy memories they made together and refuses to let Collei reduce herself to a monster like this. She even hits her with the ultimate counter-argument that a truly bad person will not beg someone else to kill them. This whole exchange works really well. It shows that Amber's kindness isn't just some kind of blind optimism. She's actually reading Collei pretty accurately here. She understands that this self-destructive villainous front is just shame and fear talking. And instead of feeding into it, she gently pulls Collei back towards the light. Collei of course does not understand how Amber can be so kind and forgiving to her after everything that just happened. And from Collei's point of view, this is kind of understandable. Her entire life has basically taught her that people will use you, abuse you. Someone like Amber must just seem borderline incomprehensible. Still, it gets through to her. So after that, the two of them team up once again and set out to find out what Lisa discovered about the ancient document. Back at HQ, they find this very Anubis-looking scholar from Sumeru Academia waiting for them. And this is where we finally get a proper explanation for what was injected into Collei all those years ago. Archon residue. Insane stuff. Yeah, apparently Collei has some literal god injected into her, sealed up inside her body behind all those bandages. I've got so many questions now. Like, where did this Archon residue come from? Was it someone who died long ago, maybe in the Archon War? Like, I'm guessing the god's name is Barnabas, but what was he the god of? So many questions, and the manga of course does not answer any of them, but it is still a very juicy reveal. Anyway, the scholar offers a treatment, but it's not exactly a cure. Instead of removing the power entirely, the plan is to seal it away deep inside Collei. And if that seal ever breaks, then the dark being inside of her will take over her body completely. Which is quite a consequence, but Collei doesn't even hesitate for a second. She agrees to the treatment immediately, which honestly shows how desperate she is to have a chance at freedom from this thing. And so the time and place for the ritual is set, the next morning at Starsnatch Cliff, which you may remember from the game as one of the highest points in Mondstadt, the place where we summoned Dvalin the first time to avoid collateral damage, and I think the principle is the same here. After that we get another awkward little Kaeya and Diluc conversation. Man, we've gotten so many of them in this manga, I love it. Over a nice refreshing glass of grape juice, which disappoints Kaeya immensely, the two of them go over recent events. Kaeya no longer thinks the Fatui is behind the Blackfire incident itself, because as he puts it, they're not stupid enough to implicate themselves so openly. But he does definitely feel like the mechanical beetles are their handiwork. And he thinks their plan was to plant all these in the city, draw in some monsters, and then arrive afterwards, play the heroes, and make themselves out like the city saviors. Which is interestingly exactly the same pattern as we saw with Ursa the Dragon. Yup, they are the bad guys and the good guys all in one. And their aim is to grasp even more political power. They're a clever bunch, the Fatui. Diluc and Kaeya agree on a plan to turn their strategy against them, and that's where the chapter ends. But yeah, like I said at the start, this chapter really does a lot for Amber in particular. It reminds us that she's not just cheerful or impulsive, she can also be a genuinely grounding presence when someone is at their lowest. At the same time, we finally got an explanation for Collei's true nature. So while chapter 11 was all about crisis, it feels like chapter 12 is more about preparation. And by the end of it, it actually looks like everything is lined up for the manga's last big payoff. Let's see how it all comes together in chapter 13. Chapter 13 is a bit of a weird finale, because for most of it, it feels like the manga is still just lining up for the big climax. The Fatui have finally arrived in Mondstadt, all the different plot threads are starting to come together, Collei's sealing ritual is about to happen, and Diluc and Kaeya's scheme is starting. So naturally, this should be the one chapter where everything just explodes, right? We'll get to that. The chapter opens with the Fatui finally strolling into town, where Mr. Mustache 3.0 is not exactly thrilled that the culprit behind the Blackfire incident hasn't been caught yet. Things escalate pretty quickly when the Fatui starts accusing Kaeya and the Knights of Favonius of sheltering the criminal. Pretty wild accusation to open with. Kaeya being Kaeya, he of course handled this in the most professional way possible, with a smooth voice and zero panic at all. He reassures the Fatui Ding Dong that the Knights are doing everything in their power to track the culprit down. But that's apparently not enough for Captain Dingleberry, so he decides he's going to find the culprit himself. Meanwhile, Collei, Amber, and the Anubis dude head off to perform the sealing ritual. And once again, the scholar from Sumeru makes it clear that this is not a perfect happy ending for Collei. If she ever uses these powers again after the ritual, the thing inside her will eventually consume her completely. As the ritual begins, we also see Kaeya and Diluc's plan start to unfold in the background. Diluc suits up going full vigilante mode and starts using the same power his father once did. essentially posing as the black fire culprit to give the Fatui someone to chase. As the ritual proceeds and we get to see the flames loosen their grip on Collei, we see what appears to be the visual mark of the sealing taking place. A funky little curse mark that appears on her neck. And I'm sorry, I just cannot look at that thing without thinking about Naruto. I can't unsee it, man. Anyway, once the ritual is done, Collei wakes up looking a whole lot healthier, with her bandages slipping off at last. She seems so much brighter and freer here, and it's honestly very nice to see. Like there might just be a genuine future for her here in Mondstadt now. But of course this nice moment only lasts about 5 seconds, because Mr. Super Mustache notices the giant light show in the background and immediately starts heading straight for it. Kaeya and Diluc notices him leaving, and it's pretty heavily implied here that the two of them knew about the ritual site all along, meaning that the whole gang was working together once again. Mr. Mustache finally arrives, Collei clearly recognizes him, and he calls this meeting a wonderful reunion. And then the chapter ends. Yep, that's it. This is the final chapter on Hoyoverse's official website, and I gotta say it's a very strange place to stop. On the one hand, Collei getting sealed and waking up in a healthier state does feel like some kind of a payoff. It is genuinely nice to see her given a new chance at life in Mondstadt. But as an ending to the whole manga, it's abrupt as hell. But I guess that's it. I mean, it's not like there's more chapters out there or anything. Okay, so maybe it's not entirely over yet. There is no official translation from MiHoYo of the remaining 3 chapters of the manga, but thankfully Genshin Impact has some amazing fans out there. And so the last 3 chapters are actually fully readable in English, you just have to search them out yourself. And as far as I can tell, the translation seems really good too. Anyway, on to the chapter. This feels like the point where the actual real climax truly begins. Amber manages to put Mustache Man to the ground, which is very satisfying to watch. She then tells Collei that they should head back together, and I really like this moment as well. Because after everything that's happened, she's still treating Collei as someone who belongs beside her. She's just fully committed to helping her, and it's very nice to see. Then Mustache Man starts using black flame powers of his own, implying that he himself has actually been injected with Archon residue as well. But the true villainy here is the way he talks to Collei, because he doesn't just try to overpower her physically, he starts saying all the exact things that she was afraid might be true about herself this whole time. That she's unclean, that she should stay hidden, that the world already threw her away. And all of a sudden we understand painfully well where all these thoughts inside Collei's head came from. Luckily though, Amber is here to make sure that Collei stays in the light. This is another chapter that just really glows up Amber. She's jumping into the fight constantly, protecting Collei, firing shots and rushing in whenever she needs to, and genuinely refusing to let this guy control the situation. I think the action in the chapter is actually really well done too. But the manga does not lose sight of Collei despite all the action. But by the end of this chapter, the whole thing has turned into a full-on boss fight. Amber is going all out, Mustache Man has finally embraced his true powers and turned into this giant flame snake, and Collei is just stuck in the middle of it. Pretty good chapter. It's way more action heavy than most of what came before it, but it still feels tied to the emotional core of Collei's story. And that's what makes it land pretty well. Let's see if that keeps up in chapter 15. Chapter 15 is where most of the major plot threads that have been established finally come together. And honestly, I was pretty impressed by how much this chapter manages to juggle at once. Because it's not just trying to end the fight, it's also trying to bring Collei's arc to an actual conclusion, give Amber one final big moment, wrap up the Black Fyre plot, and somehow still leave room for Kaeya and Diluc to do their thing in the background. It's a ton of stuff, but for the most part I think the chapter really manages to pull it off. We start the chapter off by witnessing the monster-fied Fatui maniac absolutely tear into Amber and Collei. And we once again see how Amber refuses to give up despite all odds. If nothing else, this manga has absolutely secured Amber a higher spot on my tier list. We'll revisit that later, but damn, I'm impressed. As she constantly shows off her immense power of will in the most badass way possible here. We get another Collei flashback where we see her mother desperately trying to reach her, but to no avail. Collei is in tears at this point and asks why Amber would go so far for her, as she doesn't see herself as worthy of that love or protection at all. Leading to another fantastic Amber moment, complete with action hero one-liner and all. She manages to wound the godified Fatui bad boy, which just pisses him off even more. Collei gives Amber a big old hug, triggering something in her vision. And through the power of friendship, I guess, she manages to defeat the monster by firing a super flame arrow. Perfectly aligned due to the sudden appearance of some mysteriously black flamed shackles. Now where have we seen those before? Yup, Master Diluc is here. And the evil eye on his hand appears to trigger some kind of curious reaction from Mr. Fatui. Kaeya appears encasing Diluc in ice and ordering his men to arrest the culprit of the Black Fyre incident. So this was their endgame all along. Diluc takes the fall as the Black Fyre culprit, clearing Collei from suspicion and giving the Fatui someone to drag away instead. We also see Kaeya giving Collei this really weird smile here, basically implying that this time he's got her back. Yeah, I still wouldn't trust him though. And then we see Diluc being shipped off by the Fatui, supposedly breaking free along the way, right? Why they didn't just remove Bro's mask right away is one thing that doesn't quite work out in my mind. But regardless, peace returns to Mondstadt as the crisis is resolved. And we get one last gag with Jean finally having enough time to deal with the Black Fyre incident to absolutely no use as it's now already resolved. And there we go, that's chapter 15 over and done with. Every major plot thread has been more or less resolved at this point, so I wonder what could be left to show in the last chapter. Let's take a look at chapter 16. Chapter 16 mainly serves as an epilogue of sorts to the events of the last 15 chapters, and it also helps set up the events of the game itself. Amber and Collei part ways here in quite an emotional way, as Collei sets off on her own journey with the Anubis dude, returning with him to Sumeru. So I guess that's why we haven't seen her in Mondstadt in the game. Before leaving though, Collei leaves a letter for poor Amber, who had no idea Collei was even going. Turns out Lisa was the one helping Collei write the letter in a private one-on-one session. One can only dream. In the letter, Collei reveals that she's going to study medicine and learn a lot more about the world and all the things she'd never had the time to pay attention to. She also returns the clothes she borrowed from Amber way back when, having painstakingly stitched them back together herself. Is it getting hot in here, or is it just me? Over in Il Dottore's lab, we see that his faithful Fatui henchman has returned, battered and broken. And what does he get for all his hard work? He gets disposed of. Ouch. Dottore then opens a letter, and out drops Diluc's broken mask and the evil eye. But at this point, it seems Il Dottore doesn't really care for it anymore. Back at Diluc's tavern, we meet the boys hanging out for a glass of wine. Actual wine this time, yeah, Kaeya is very pleased. Here we of course learn that Diluc quickly and easily escaped, and was never recaptured. Kaeya comes bearing gifts, giving Diluc a new vase to replace the one he broke way earlier in the manga. And inside the vase we catch a little glimmer of what appears to be a pyrovision, supposedly the same one that we see Diluc use in the game itself. Did Kaeya sneak it in there? Did the gods choose to bless Diluc after everything he went through? We don't know. But either way, it's a nice final note to end on for the two brothers. And that's it, the end of the Genshin Impact manga. What a ride it's been. This video is already insanely long at this point, so I'll save my final thoughts for the conclusion coming right up. And there we have it, the Genshin Impact manga. It really was way more important than I thought. Going into this, I expected a neat little side story, maybe a few extra lore tidbits, some fun fan service for people who already love Genshin Impact, but not really anything more than that. But that's definitely not what this ended up being. Because the manga doesn't just add fluff to Genshin, it adds some context, and some important context at that. It gives us a origin story for Collei, who I assume will be important in the events to come. It finally gives us a lot deeper understanding of Diluc, his father, the evil eye, and why his relationship is as bitter with the Knights of Favonius as it is. Not only that, it fleshes out Kaeya's colder side as well, no pun intended. And it gives Amber way more time to shine than I ever expected. It doesn't just add to the characters either, it also gives us some important context on Mondstadt itself. Both during the prologue with Vanessa, but also through the way the present day story deals with the corruption, politics, and Fatui aspect of it all. That is a lot of important context and lore for a manga that most people could easily skip over, or not even realize exists. And I think that's what surprised me the most about this. Not necessarily that the manga was good, although I do think it was pretty good overall, but that it actually fleshed out parts of the game much more in retrospect. And of course, my main man Diluc is the clearest example of that, because in the game you can tell that there's clearly something going on with him. There's some history there between him and Kaeya. But the manga actually lets us experience where that bitterness came from. Seeing what happened to his father with the whole Knights of Favonius gaslighting everyone, and choosing politics over the truth of their own captain, just makes his whole character click that much harder into place. And it makes him stop feeling like this mysterious, grumpy vigilante guy, Or at least it lets him justify that just a little bit. Amber might honestly be the biggest winner of the whole manga for me though, and I can't believe I'm saying that, man. Because the game introduces her in a particular way that I think a lot of people aren't really a big fan of, including myself. Don't get me wrong, she's always optimistic, sweet, upbeat, and helpful, but she's also got some quite annoying quirks that we as the audience has to contend with. In the manga though, it shows what happens when that kindness that she exudes is actually tested. She keeps reaching out to Collei when it's clear that there's something up with her, and even when Kaeya correctly identifies Collei as the culprit, it's not enough to sway her. Her resolve is just rock solid, and it's quite impressive. A lot more impressive than I gave her credit for, I'll tell you that. Yeah, we're doing a giant leap on the tier list, boys. A tier is now A for Amber. I still think that she's quite annoying at times, and that's what keeps her from S tier, but this manga just really fleshed out a character for me in a way that just makes her so much more well-rounded and well-defined. Anyway, then there's Collei, who is definitely the whole emotional core of the story. Her arc is pretty damn tragic, but not in a way that feels ham-fisted to me. The manga does a really good job of showing how much her trauma has affected how she sees the world and those around her. It's warped her perspective completely. She doesn't just think the world is cruel, she's been taught over and over again that she is definitely the problem here, and that she's cursed, dangerous and unclean, and better to put away somewhere. And because of that, even basic kindness feels foreign to her. And that's what makes her relationship with Amber work so well. It's not like Amber fixes her overnight or anything, but she does give Collei something that she's clearly not had a lot of in her life. That is proof that not everyone is going to hurt her, and that not everyone sees her as a monster. And that part of the story worked really well for me. I can't wait to see where Collei shows up next. The Fatui once again seems even more nasty than last time we saw them. In the game, they can feel a bit theatrical to me. They have these big personalities, exotic names, elaborate schemes, and all that. But the manga actually makes them feel properly vile. Between notorious experiments on human beings, the manipulation and absolute gaslighting of Collei, the way they take advantage of and exploit political tension, and the way they manufacture chaos just to swoop in and play the hero, yeah, they feel a lot more sinister here. Moving on to Mondstadt as a setting, I think the prologue actually adds a lot to it as well. Seeing just how far Mondstadt had fallen under the Noble's reign, and how Vanessa's story ties into the city's identity as we know it from the game, remind you that Mondstadt's ideals were not just something that were given to them freely. They had to be fought for by someone. And that absolutely makes the nation feel just a tad more real. Now, is the manga perfect? No, not really. The pacing is a bit uneven at times. We've got 16 chapters to work with here, and while some chapters are absolutely packed with lore and character work, others feel more like connective tissue. Of course, you can't have full action or full character development going 24/7. Like, I understand that they had to make some concessions here, but I do still think the pacing is a bit too uneven at times. But all that said, I definitely came away way more impressed than disappointed here. Again, this isn't just a bonus side story, it feels like essential lore. That adds both meaningful depth to the major characters, to Mondstadt, and to the broader story itself. Now, do I think you need to read the manga to understand Genshin necessarily? Now, I don't think you need to read the manga to understand Genshin. Like, the game still functions without it for sure. But I do think it makes certain parts of Genshin's story hit just that bit harder, and gives the characters depth in such a meaningful way that I am really appreciative that I took the time to read it. It makes Diluc, Amber, and Collei better characters, and it makes the world feel just a bit richer and harsher than it first appears in-game. So yeah, that's it. The Genshin Impact manga is really more important than I thought. And honestly, it just makes me even more curious what other essential lore is hidden outside of the game itself. What else have I been missing? Anyway, those are my thoughts. If you made it all the way through this video, thank you guys so very much for watching. Next video will be about the game itself once again, and I can't wait to see you there. I'll see you for the next one.